I've spoken with a number of people recently who've been talking about why is now actually feeling more difficult than it did a few weeks ago during full lockdown. This whole situation has obviously been incredibly stressful, and I think we can't generalise. We've all been finding our own ways through it, and we've all had our own specific stresses, difficulties, positive sides, and some of us will have had much more difficulty than others. But I think perhaps why now is so much more difficult is because at least during lockdown there was an answer. The answer was stay at home. However horrible that meant life became, however difficult it was, whatever the circumstances, and I appreciate that for some people they were incredibly difficult circumstances, at least it was an answer that was relatively simple to understand, and we were all doing our best to try and make that happen. That meant that you got a collective sense of all working together, so you got that feeling of community even if you did feel very isolated physically from that community. It also meant that it felt relatively straightforward, hard, absolutely, and a challenge, but this was a clear path. This is what you're meant to do, quite simple. The difficulty as things begin to ease, as I see it, is there are two major things that are happening. One is the uncertainty of that, and as humans we're not great at dealing with uncertainty. We like to know how things are meant to be, how things are going, and with uncertainty comes worry, fear, anxiety. So there's the uncertainty that it feels like maybe no one has one single simple answer right now. But the other thing that's happening is that the answer is probably going to be different for different people, for different families, for different schools, potentially even for different regions of the country, depending on individual circumstance and depending on your kind of risk profile. So actually, what we're having to do right now is even more exhausting, because what we're having to do right now is negotiate risk assessment. We're having to work out what are the risks to me and how big do I feel my resources are to cope with those risks. And not everyone is going to come up with the same answer. And that might not be because they're wrong. It might be that their circumstances are different from ours. So it might be completely right that we come up with different answers, but nevertheless, that feels quite stressful, because now it feels more like there's responsibility on us to get it right, to weigh up what are the risks, the benefits, what are the pros and cons. And if we don't feel confident either in where we get the information about how to do that risk assessment, or in knowing what is the risk to me, or in knowing what are my resources to cope with that risk, then that massively adds to a sense of uncertainty. And so then we're having to deal with the picture is changing. I don't feel confident about it, or I don't know where I fit within that. And also we're having that kind of constant questioning of our own judgment and comparing to other people's judgment. Are they doing something different because they know something that I don't know? And so we're looking for information, and it's exhausting. And that requires so much more concentration, so much more kind of effort than just, here's a very simple rule and we're doing our best to stick to it. So actually, although it seems odd, I don't think it is surprising that a lot of us are finding the easing of lockdown stressful, and possibly even more stressful than lockdown itself. I don't have any easy answers to that. All I can say is I think it's important to hold on to pieces of information that you do have that apply to you. And I think it's about saying to yourself, okay, it's okay to feel uncertain, and I'm doing my best to make sense of this. It's okay that my assessment of my own or my family's own risks, what could be difficult for us, and what we've got, the resources to cope with that, might not be the same as other people's, and that's okay. So we have to give ourselves permission to be different. We have to be kind to each other about that as well. This is not an opportunity for judging people for being too risk averse, too frightened, or for going out there and doing too much. As long as we're sticking the best we can to what the government advice and to what the legal guidelines are, within that there is a bit of grey, there is a bit of wobble room, and then we have to be kind to each other to say we're all doing our best. Let's work from that basic assumption that 99% of us are going to be doing our best to manage the risk that we see and the resource that we feel we've got to cope with that risk. And it might not be the same for any one of us or for any family as it is for anybody else. And that might be okay. So give yourselves permission to not be sure, but to make the best decision you can for you and for your family, and to stick up for that. You know, it's okay to say to other people, without it being a criticism of them, actually, this doesn't feel, our family are just not ready for that yet, or there's some different circumstances for our family, so we're not doing that, and that's fine. Let's all be kind to each other. Let's all help each other the best we can to manage these uncertain times and to gradually balance the risk with the resources we've got to cope. And hopefully all of us can support each other to build our resources, so even if this risk doesn't disappear completely, that we all feel a better sense of being able to cope with it. Thanks.